Hello, everyone. Welcome to Comic-Con at Home. This is the TragiComics panel, in which we're going to be discussing how cartoonists use dark humor to come to terms with and understand the world that they're working in and writing about. We have a murderer's row of talent for this panel. We're starting with Tom Gauld. Tom Gauld's been working with The Guardian and New Scientist for a few years and publishing through Drawn Quarterly to talk about the absurdity of the world and absurdity of various professions within the world. So, is that fair to say?
Yes, scientists and writers particularly, but I guess other ones too.
Next up is Simon Hanselmann, who has been working with Fantagraphics for a few years on Bad Gateway and the Megan Mogg comics. And I believe there is another book that that may be coming out soon that you might want to hold up and show people.
Oh, there indeed is. It's called Seeds and Stems. It's out in August. It's a collection of rarities. It's very thick. Also, books available in 13 languages around the world. Google it.
John Pham is next. John is also publishing through Fantagraphics and has published in Kramer's Ergot and some other titles. And J and K is your latest book from them. Hello, John.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Walter Scott is up next. Walter is the creator of Wendy and Wendy's Revenge and Wendy Master of Art from Drawn Quarterly.
Hello. That's right.
And finally is Rikke Villadsen, who is a cartoonist from Denmark and has published The Sea and Cowboy through Fantagraphics.
Hi.
The wonders of doing a Zoom panel convention. I kind of want to start with a question for everyone. And it's the horrible broad question, but it's the thing that I'm really, really curious about. We are living in very surreal times, and honestly, it seems to get more surreal and more almost beyond comedy as time goes on. What point does what you all do for a living, addressing this increasingly strange time through finding humor in it and finding something to say through humor, at what point does that become almost oppressively difficult? At what point is it hard to find the comedy in the various parts of you? I would say you all explore different things about life through comedy, but at what point does it become almost impossible to do that? I mean, we'll do this alphabetically, so Tom, you start.
Well, I mean, I found the first month of the whole COVID crisis and lockdown really difficult. I was feeling stressed out and a bit depressed about it, and I found it quite difficult to think what to do with my cartoons. And I really didn't want to make cartoons about the virus because I just, at the time, I think I was just feeling very unhappy about it. And I tried to make cartoons about other things, and not that I was trying to make sort of weird, happy, suddenly go like, there's a virus, I've got to make self-help cartoons that make everyone feel happy. But I sort of wanted to do things which didn't address it directly, and especially in my science cartoons when the science magazine is completely full of stuff about the crisis. So I had about a month where I really didn't attempt to do anything to do with the virus, and that was more just because I was unhappy about it. And then slowly it's begun to find its way back into particularly the literary cartoons I do for The Guardian. But I find it quite difficult. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier today. I think one of the problems is, one of the ways I make humor is by taking an ordinary thing and look at it in an unexpected way. So in the past, I might have done a cartoon about a bookshop and had a caveman going to the bookshop, and the humor arises out of, we all know what an experience of going to a bookshop is like, and the caveman going there can therefore be funny. But because life is so different now, and going to a bookshop is weird, you have to stand on this spot and you have to use hand sanitizer and people have masks on. So ordinary things have become so weird that it's quite difficult to bounce off those in some ways. So you have the choice of kind of ignoring the virus and setting cartoons in the old world as we knew it. or making every single cartoon about the virus and whoa, the world's weird, like those emails everyone sends where they say, I hope you're doing well in this difficult time, which is interesting for about a week, and then it's just a slightly tiresome thing that we all feel we have to say to each other. So I guess I'm now trying to make some cartoons which deal with the virus, but also just say to myself, no, I don't need to, they don't all need to be about that. I can just do something weird and strange, and some weeks it's addressing the weirdness of our life, and other weeks it's just trying to do something which is amusing and takes people's minds off. And I guess there's lots of different ways to deal with it, and those are in my small world of my cartoons, that's what I'm trying to do, is some weeks address it and some weeks take people's minds off it.
Simon, what about you?
I'm loving it. Yeah, I've got like almost 100 pages here of COVID comics I've drawn since March 13th. It's ripe for the plucking. There's so much funny shit happening and horrible stuff. How could you not want to delve into it and wallow around and lick the poles? Yeah, I've just been smashing stuff out. Free webcomic, pivoted to comics available on phones. Yeah, you can look at it for free on a phone. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm entertaining people. Everyone's freaking the hell out. It's like, I'm going to entertain people, stop working on my proper old world books and just entertain people and riff. And, there's a lot of good material out there. Yeah. It's as simple as that, Graeme.
John, what about you?
I think so. I mean, to Tom's points, I think sometimes you do need to give it a little bit of time, which is totally different from what Simon you're working, but for me at least. But yeah, I had a baby in late January. We had our second kid, and things were already, kind of nuts. And we were already practicing sort of like responsible hygiene and stuff around the house, because you have to do that around a newborn. And it was just generally really psychotic too, because I had so many people in the house. We had, like, my mother-in-law visited and was staying with us, actually staying in this office, in this room here. And we weren't getting much sleep. And then the virus became the news. And I started to have fantasies of maybe contracting it and not having heavy symptoms, so that I could go to a hotel room and just work on comics for 2 weeks while I was in quarantine. And I had that thought, and I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. Maybe I can turn that into a strip or something. But yeah, you could turn pretty much any tense. I think maybe the more tense the situation, the more ripe for comedy, because you got to relieve that tension somehow. So, I mean, I can't think of more tense times, that I've lived through than these times today.
Walter, how do you feel about that?
I think that sometimes writing comics in a time like this, it doesn't feel like the direct action that maybe you feel like you have a responsibility to do, especially now in this time of protesting anti-Black racism. It's a really strange time in an Instagram feed to be like, and now a story about a white girl who's so awkward. So I find myself in this predicament like that. But I think that it's important as artists to remember that there's different ways to participate, especially in difficult times. And so for me and the work that I do, I try to think of it more as being like a seer, somebody who's observing and creating artwork that is just sort of observations of the world, and not out there to solve a problem, like making art to solve a problem, because that can get pretty didactic or something. It's more about creating something that carves out sort of the contours of what we're experiencing. And in that way, I think it's something that you can revisit over and over, even if the time has passed or things change.
Rikke, I mean, I feel that sort of touches on the way you approach stuff as well. I mean, how are you responding to what's happening now?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, that was because you pronounced my name.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I went back in time because the modern human being is kind of thinking of themselves as immortal, I guess. But like 150 years ago, a lot of disease were around and a lot of people died from tuberculosis. So I came to think about the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch, who lived 150 years ago. And a lot of his work, his painting is around this sorrow and sickness and death and very emotional work he's doing. So where I was situated in the quarantine, I started making Edvard Munch paintings from memory. And so it was this setting 150 years ago in Norway. And two characters emerged from that. A woman who is going to die from tuberculosis and her husband. And so this is my way of reflecting. Go back in time and then do it in another setting and having a reference that is not my own surroundings. So in that setting, I could kind of relieve some of my thoughts and feelings on the pandemic situation.
I sort of getting back to something that Simon said. Like, Simon, you talked about things being very immediate and riffing off of events, and I feel that your humor, and I feel that the same's true of John and Walter, is very relationship based and is very based in the idea of the comedy of people interacting and then socialization,
social politics.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so, you know, especially today, do you feel that your work has a different feeling, a different element to it at a time when we're all social distancing?
I've been trying to make it more entertaining. My stuff I've been doing, like, it's still depressing and horrible and like all hardcore relationship stuff, but right now I'm doing like an action riff. Like, I thought, let's just make it like an action comic, like make it a bit fun, and I'm exploring different things. I'm just bouncing around and seeing where it goes. But yeah, it's different to the old stuff. It's broader and I don't know. I've never really done a heavily serialized webcomic like this as well. I've always made zines and tried to like sell product and get money for the work that I've done, the hours I put into things. But this, you know, really does feel like entertainment for people. I've got thousands of people like looking at it, more than I've ever had. And when I miss a day, which is rare, people message me like, no, this is the highlight of my day. So I feel a lot of pressure that I have to do it. I've started doing it. I've been doing it for like 3 months now, and people are kind of addicted to it in a way. So I can't stop. I've built this prison, and it's frankly, don't get me started. Yeah.
I'm really curious. What is, and this is for everyone. So Tom, I'll start with you again. We'll go through alphabetically. What is the role of the audience play when you guys are creating your work? Because I feel that, Simon, you're talking about people messaging you when the immediate feedback. Is the audience particularly in your minds when you're creating all this, especially when you're working on comedy and on humor material? Are you very aware of what the audience might want versus your particular sense of humor?
Wouldn't say it's not being aware of what they might want, but for me the question most often is, what if I'm going to riff off an idea, is that idea clear enough in the audience's mind that my funny version of it will hit home? And I'm aware that my cartoons have these two different audiences, is in the Guardian newspaper itself and in New Scientist magazine. There's, I imagine, a slightly older audience, and then there's an internet version which is I suspect a slightly younger audience. So I don't want to make anything which is totally based on some Twitter meme which the older people have missed, and I don't want to get totally into the weeds of something which is out of date and nobody gets on the other side. So I'm always thinking, what will people know, and how is it funny to riff off this thing? And I think for all humor, you have to have an understanding of what your audience knows. And I wouldn't say it's in terms of giving them what they want, although I suppose they want to be entertained, and that's the main thing I'm trying to do. So I sort of think of it as I'm making it for an audience of lots of me's, lots of me, but not the ones who've made the work or thought about it. Because if you just make it for an audience of yourself, then you go on the journey of making the work, and you almost don't need to make it, because if you're the only audience, you've made it. That's done. So I do think of it as not primal scream therapy. It is broadcasting to someone who will receive it. So I do think about the audience, but it's not a case of giving them what they want. It's giving them what they might like, I suppose.
Simon, are you making comics for an army of you?
Yeah, probably. I'm mostly just trying to please myself and amuse myself. It's also my therapeutic outlet and like what I do to keep sane. You know, the pandemic hit and, you know, everything's nuts and everyone's freaking out and the internet's exacerbating everything and we're all the time. So this is my coping mechanism. I want to entertain people, but predominantly I'm just out to entertain me and quell the horrors of the day.
John, move on from the horrors of the day there.
I don't know how I can follow that. I mean, it's pretty much what Simon said. But yeah, if you're doing humor, you kind of have to think of your audience because, I mean, you're making work that is trying to get a laugh. But I mean, sometimes, yeah, it's like what amuses yourself. But I think as far as like JNK goes, I definitely have an audience in mind. Totally go for clarity. I edit, you know, a lot of the writing and the cartooning down to like its, you know, most its barest essentials, just so things don't get muddied or like jokes get convoluted. Yeah, and I look to like classic newspaper humor cartoonists for inspiration because those guys and ladies were, you know, writing jokes on the daily and trying to communicate to like, you know, maybe millions of people in their audience. And if you get too esoteric or, you know, self sort of gratifying, then it doesn't really connect and your syndicate drops you. So, so my comics are like, they're just kind of weird. The weirdness is in its DNA. And I feel sometimes to kind of like offset that, the humor's got to be kind of normal. So there's this like weird tension between weird and like classically like newspaper humor normal that I think is trying to happen in the work I do. So, yeah.
Walter, how does that fit in with what you're doing? So one of the things that I really like about Wendy is it's very specific, and yet its specificity is what makes it universal.
Well, you just answered my question for me because I've been very lucky to have people come up to me and say, "Oh my God, this I totally resonated with this. This happened to me. Like you said it, you hit the nail on the head." Because I think there's a lot of fear of like, well, if I get too specific and I make it too much about my life or related to something that really happened, people aren't really going to meet you there. But like, it's kind of like, it kind of feels good to feel like something really weird and specific can happen to you. You could put it down and like people will respond and say that exactly happened to me. So in a way, it's kind of like therapeutic for me as well.
And Rikke, I mean, how aware are you of the audience when you're creating, you know, something like Cowboy? Is that something that you're creating for a particular audience, or is that something that you're hoping will find an audience after you've created the work?
Well, I think I created it pretty much for my own fun, and it wasn't I did it the story, and then it was ready to print. So there's been no editing or no one's seen it before the book was out. I think it's completely different from if you post on Instagram, because then you get the immediately reaction from people. And especially if you work with the unexpected, because sometimes, yeah, then people suddenly will expect the unexpected. And what you do about that, then you have to be really normal.
Simon made a reference to, you know, the tragedy the darkness that's in this. And you know, looking at things like J&K or Simon, your work, or Rikke, your work as well. Like there's such a darkness. Like this panel's called TragiComics. There is quite clearly a darkness in all of your work. Where's the line to balance that? How do you find the line between, if not darkness, if not tragedy, then at least something that is anti-comedy, something that is almost working against the joke with the joke? I mean, Tom, I think you do work a lot with absurdity, with sort of pointing out the strangeness of certain situations that we think are straightforward or odd and don't question. Like, I don't want to say where do you get your jokes from, but where is the line for comedy there?
Okay, I'm going to tell you that, but first, I'm in my wife's studio here, and I shut the door, and it's really, really hot. I'm going to have to open the door. I didn't want to leave when anyone else was talking, so I'll just open the door, and then I'll answer your question.
Simon, we're going to ask you first, then.
No, I've done it. The door
no, it's good. It's good.
Perfectly timed.
It's not that big a studio. I just didn't want to do it when someone else was talking and look like I was storming out of this thing.
This is just a dry British comedy bit. There was no window. He's making it up.
Yeah.
Virtual background. That's not even real.
Yeah. I googled very messy artist studio and found it. But no, to answer your question, I mean, I think all humor comes generally out of things going wrong, out of failure. It's very difficult to write happy, successful characters and have it be funny. I mean, I think we like humor because it shows us failure in a way that we can kind of deal with, and we can feel close to that failing character. And the question is how dark and how much failure you put in there. And with mine, I guess I don't like comedy to get too bleak. I like it when it's a certain type of flat, darkness, which can be verging on bleak, but once it goes into truly bleak, I find myself feeling sad, and I think I'm quite sensitive to that. So in my cartoons, things get bad, but they never get that bad. And I like showing failure, and I like showing it in a restrained way where I almost don't say how the characters are feeling, and you can project that into the little stick men or whatever I've drawn. So for me, the line is where it starts making me feel sad, truly sad. Then I wouldn't do that to my characters. Maybe I'm just a coward, but I go on again that audience of lot. I don't want to look out at my audience and see lots of sad me's all crying at my work. So yeah, I just use my own judgment really.
Simon, what about your judgment?
Anything goes for me, really. I don't know, except for like overt, horrible, really bad shit. But I don't know. I like to just go where I go and explore. As a wanky artist, just I like a bit of darkness, and that's just what I live. I mean, I'm writing about life. My absurd comic is just about my experience, and I've seen a lot of horrible things and a lot of beautiful things, and that's life. So I mesh them together in a big ball while dancing on a knife's edge.
Again, John, follow that. I just want to copy and paste Simon's response. I mean, that's it. Yeah, I'm still, I guess, exploring and figuring out what the limits are. It'd be great to just push it and see how depressing or sad I could get a story or like a tone to see if I could just pull it back and get a laugh out of it.
I was going to say Jinky is very, like, I was really hit by Jinky. I think Jinky gets very, very dark.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think is so powerful about it. It really lulls you into the sense of security and then like hits you in the gut. It's wonderful because of that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, and I'm hoping never to be like gratuitous with that. Like I'm just just doing it to depress an audience or something. It's usually when it does get dark, it just is. It's not like I set out to purposefully make a sad story. like, you know, one of the characters dying or something. It's just something that comes from like a compulsion where it's like, yeah, maybe something like that happened in my life and I have to kind of process it. But I'm putting it down on paper and I'm like, there's got to be some way to kind of balance it out and draw some tension from the story. Otherwise it's just like monotonously one emotion, which is fine, but like like Simon says, I mean, that's generally not what life is about. It's, you know, you get everything. You get humor, you get tragedy, you get, you know, pornography, you get action. There's all these genres happening in your life, so why not?
And Walter, like, Wendy is simultaneously not outright bleak, but also sticks with you. Like, Wendy really stuck with me when I read it. There's something about it that is quietly bleak, for want of a better way of putting it.
Like an early 2000s indie film.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, I think that, okay, my work, it deals with themes like, especially the new book, it deals with like alienation, sex work, addiction, alcoholism. Like there's a lot of themes in this work that are pretty dark. And I think that one way that I've managed to offset it is this underlying sweetness, which depending on what angle I look at my work, I find actually quite sickening that something so sweet can come out of me. But it's really the only way to make any of this possible, because otherwise it would just seem really cynical. And like, I think the core of what I'm trying to do is about people, and like I'm trying to show like a little glimmer of hope underneath all of it, that like maybe the thing that like keeps everyone going is like the desire for connection and to keep communicating with each other. This is probably why I really liked Steven Universe and watched all of it, because that seemed to be, it has such like a commie queer core, that show, and it was like helpful to me to keep writing comics.
I would never have put Wendy and Steven Universe together, and now that you've said that, I'm 100% seeing it and going, I need to reread Master of Art. I totally see it. Ricky, again, looking at something like The Seer or Cowboy, I feel that there is a bleakness there, but bleakness may not be the right way of putting it. There's something there that is, I don't want to say deeper than comedy, but you're stretching you're reaching for these very deep themes. Like, are you aware of a line where comedy ends and something else begins in your work?
No, I think also it's a very fine balance between those, and I think some of the difficult themes or subjects that I work with, I need to distance it a bit, and also some of the the darkness is actually it just emerge from within. It's how I feel, or it's how I'm doing while I'm working. And to be able to connect this with my work or to let it out, I need to distance a bit, and I do that through humor. And I think also if if what you have to say is a bit harsh, and maybe you take on a theme that is now someone is calling.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I think that might be me. Hold on. Oh God. Please edit that out.
Hello. Well, in my case, when I'm kind of let's say I'm doing this as a feminist, and I'm looking at some gender constructions, and I think these subjects can very easily make you seem very bitter. Like the woman protesting and pointing out all the toxic masculinity and the way pop culture tells story. So instead of being harsh or seem like a sour old woman, I tend to castrate the masculinity in a very funny way, and I make you all laugh.
That sort of touches on really the last thing I wanted to ask, and you know, we'll go in reverse order because Rikke's kind of just mentioned it. Can you see yourself working outside of humor? How necessary is looking at these things and finding the humor in it for you to be able to make the work? Like, Walter, do you think there is can you see yourself writing something that doesn't have the release valve of comedy in there, or do you think you have to do that in order to make the work?
Ugh, I could barely not do that in my personal life. Like, I have this horrible habit of always trying to like smooth it over with a joke and tip my hat and do a little trick and like, are we good now? Are we good? And like, it's just not something that I can separate from my own psyche, much to the detriment of my life. So that's a struggle. It would be a struggle to not do that. And further to that, I also, you know, make sculpture, I make drawings, like I do performance, and that ethos of humor is in everything else. So so no, and in fact, it's just getting bigger.
John, what about you?
I try. In my self-published comic Epoxy, I have another serialized story that's just more of like a straight sci-fi drama. And I do find myself in moments, you know, really suppressing the urge to put something funny or a joke in a moment to kind of break the tension. But that's not really what that particular story is about. So yeah, it's weird. Once your brain gets wired to like find the joke and everything, and to always, you know, sort of look for humor, it's hard to kind of shed that. But you know, I mean, you could draw an analogy to a musician who works in a certain kind of style. Like if you're used to playing, if you're like, you know, playing a horned instrument or something, you're used to playing like jazz. And then all of a sudden you've got to be like in the 90s, like ska, like revival band, you know, you just have to like practice that muscle. So it's totally possible. It's just a little hard.
Simon, can you see yourself shedding the humor, or do you think it's something that you need to do?
I think it's easier to shed the humor in a way. I can write drama easy. That's just boring day-to-day business. So the difficult bit is peppering in the humor and thinking of a joke that's not been made before. So yeah, I think, you know, I could write, you know, a ton of mystery novels and, you know, all that business. I think I might, you know, get sick of the comedy and just segue into sort of dry, you know, detective dramas.
God, I want to see you do detective dramas so much now.
Yeah, next year.
Tom, what about you?
Well, you know, because I have these 2 weekly jobs, so I have to make 2 jokes, 2 jokes every week, which doesn't sound that much when I say it, but I've got to do 2 cartoons every week, which are funny. So the idea of when I write longer stories of them not just being made up with jokes is enjoyable, and having that long space to tell a story, but they're always still slightly funny. And I think I would have trouble stepping away from that. I think I'm slightly embarrassed about wanting to tell people these stories anyway. I feel rather and the humor sort of is a coping mechanism. Like, well, it's meant to be funny, so that sort of makes it easier to do. I mean, maybe I'll get braver and be able to write a story which is me standing up and telling a story. But somehow the humor helps me do it and helps me feel less embarrassed by it, which is a big thing, a big part of making my work. And I don't know about the others, but it's persuading yourself that it's worth doing. And somehow the humor for me makes it easier to do. So maybe one day I'll write a very serious thing, but at the moment the humor is it's sewn into everything I do, really.
I think that is a very good place to end this. We're looking at the time. We are coming up on time. I'm just going to go down the line and ask all of you to tell everyone where they can find you, what the work is that you want people to pick up. And Tom, we'll start with you once again.
Well, my latest book is a book of science cartoons, The Department of Mind-Blowing Theories, from Drawn and Quarterly. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as @TomGauld.
Simon?
Yeah, Seeds and Stems, B-side zines collection, lots of rarities, 360 pages. It's got like a plastic cover. It's like a piss shield. You can read it in the toilet. It's like a Paris Review toilet book. It's out in August from Fantagraphics. You can also get these from Fantagraphics. Yeah.
Hey, John, you just held up your book.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't paying
I did a quote on it.
Yeah, Simon was very gracious and gave me a quote. Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, you
So
can
yes.
find Fantagraphics. I also self-publish a comic zine named Epoxy, and new issues should be out soon. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me.
Walter, where can people find you?
So my new book, Wendy, Master of Art, is available from Drawn and Quarterly, wherever books are sold or handed to you through a door by an anxious person. And you can find me on the internet if you Google Walter Scott or Wendy or Walter Scott Wendy or Walter Scott Wendy Comics. And you can also find me on Instagram at Walter K. Scott.
And Ricky, you finally, where can people find you?
In Denmark. No. I'm also on the internet and on Instagram. I'm Rikke Vild. I don't know how would you pronounce that in English.
Villadsen?
Villadsen?
No, that's actually not my name on Instagram. That was taken.
No.
Yeah, but I'm doing the pandemic comic. I'm doing right now. I'm gonna self-publish it. So I'm also gonna start a Kickstarter.
Ooh.
Next week, and I want you all to come and support.
That's a very exciting thing to announce to everyone.
Oh, can I
And
I
of
forgot.
course, you can find my
sorry.
books at Graphics or in any bookstore.
And John just said something for a second. John?
Oh, I forgot to give a link to my website, and sorry if I'm interrupting anyone, but this is one of the inserts in my comic in J&K, and there's what seems like a fake URL here is actually a real URL, and on it you can visit my website. I don't know if you could see it, but it says Scotty and Dottie's Pooter Emporium Warehouse.space. That's a real website that I bought, and that's where you can find me on the internet. So good luck typing all that in.
That is the perfect place to end this.
There's all things in your book, John.
It looks amazing.
Thank you.
Little bits in it.
Okay, we are literally minutes away from being cut off. So I'm just going to thank all of you for taking part. This was a lot of fun. And hopefully everyone else had fun, and hopefully everyone watching this had fun. But yeah, thank you everyone for taking part.
Thanks, Graeme.